The coastal areas along the Pacific Ocean were seriously hit by the giant tsunami 25 to 40 minutes after the earthquake. The tsunami was more than 10 meters high in many places, and the highest recorded water was approximately 40 meters, observed at Aneyoshi district in Miyako City, Iwate Prefecture. The tsunami and nuclear plant crisis resulted in catastrophic damage to coastal areas in the Tohoku and Kanto regions. The disaster caused massive flows of displaced people, which is the main subject of this presentation. It is well known that great many refugees fled their homes in the three prefectures of Iwate, Miyagi, and Fukushima. There were many casualties in the tsunami. This slide shows the number of dead and missing since March 19th, when the National Policy Agency began to announce nationwide numbers. The number of victims increased rapidly up to the end of April, and as of September 10th, it exceeds 15,700. The number of missing is more than 4,000 persons, even now, almost 6 months after the tsunami. Immediately after the tsunami, a mass evacuation took place from the coastal areas to the inland areas and more distant regions. This graph shows the number of hinansha, or refugees at the Hinansho or shelters over time, based on announcement by the National Policy Agency and the Cabinet Office. The total number on March 19th, 8 days after the earthquake, exceeded 400,000. From then, it started to decrease, but as many as 10,000 persons remained refugees, even in early June. This slide shows the evacuation process. The evacuation started by leaving one's original residence. Houses of relatives or friends were often used for evacuation by refugees. But the great majority of evacuation sites were shelters. The places selected for shelters were quite diverse, such as schools, gymnasiums, preschools, city or town halls, community centers, libraries, hospitals, fire stations, shopping centers, hotels or inns, shrines or temples, and so on. Local governments worked to construct kasetsu jutaku in Japanese, or temporary houses for refugees, and encourage them to move into these houses. Actually, temporary houses have gradually replaced shelters as evacuation sites since April. Please note that there is a difference in the definition of refugees among the official statistics. Namely, the National Policy Agency uses the term refugee for only those persons who live in shelters. On the other hand, the Cabinet Office and the National System of Refugee Information includes as refugees those persons who have evacuated to the homes of relatives or friends or to temporary houses. A very important consideration in this process is whether refugees can finally return to their own homes after living in shelters or temporary houses. This is an example of a temporary house located in Ishinomaki City, Miyagi Prefecture. As another important issue, we have to refer to the differences in how the evacuation process was carried out among the three prefectures. In Iwate Prefecture, all of the shelters were closed at the end of August, and refugees moved to temporary houses. In Miyagi Prefecture, most of the refugees moved to temporary houses, but a certain portion of them still remain in shelters, partly due to the mismatch between supply and the demand of temporary house dwellings. The situation of refugees from the coastal areas of Fukushima is very complicated. The nuclear plant crisis still continues, and thus refugees have had to face the painful experience of lives at shelters or temporary houses, with little prospect of returning to their previous residence due to high radiation dose in their home municipalities. The major data sources for identifying refugees are the many different files released by local governments and the National System of Refugee Information established by Japan's Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications. Different lists containing information on individual refugees, such as name, age, sex, home address, and so on, have been uploaded by municipalities and shelters to many official websites of local governments in the three prefectures. Since such files contain detailed data on refugees and are thus full of personal information, they should not be released under usual normal conditions from the standpoint of privacy protection. However, such announcement on websites were finally adopted by giving priority to confirming the safety of citizens. Newly updated files have often been added based on changes in refugees living in each shelter over time. The situation reflects the severity of tsunami's damage, but it also presents a lucky chance for human mobility research from the geographical perspective. Please understand that there are great differences in the refugee list format among the three prefectures. Let me introduce two examples, Iwate Prefecture and Ishinomaki City, Miyagi Prefecture. This slide shows the first page of refugee list released by Iwate Prefecture on April 28th. This list is very, very long, more than 700 pages, and contains information on approximately 70,000 refugees, such as municipality where shelter exists, name, home address, age, and shelter name. Before presenting the second example of Ishinomaki City, I'll show you a few photos. This map shows the location of this city, Ishinomaki City. These photos are taken in central Ishinomaki on April 30th, and they vividly show the extent of the tsunami damage. After the tsunami, a local school, Minato Elementary School was used as a major shelter. This shows temporary baths constructed by the self-defense forces in the schoolyard. About 100,000 members of the self-defense forces were dispatched to the devastated areas, and their refugees and damaged area support activities were greatly appreciated everywhere. This photo shows the south side of a local preschool. You can see that the clock stopped at 3:25 p.m., just when the gigantic tsunami hit this building. This is Minato Elementary School, where almost all of the classrooms were full of refugees. This school's pupils had to go to another school in the city and takes classes there. This slide shows the final page of the handwritten list of refugees at Minato Elementary School, which also contains information on the teachers of the Minato preschool. Since these kinds of lists are basically released by the shelter, they are somewhat difficult for us to use due to the different file formats. Meanwhile, the data derived from the National System of Refugee Information is rather convenient for us to use. However, since this system was developed for effective confirmation of refugees' information, academic researchers are not allowed to access it. This system was established by the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications in April. Refugees themselves provide their current information to the municipalities of their home address through the municipalities of their current address. Please note that a particular refugee can be counted more than once due to a change of shelter. So the data based on the system are not necessarily exact and complete. The data based on this information system are shown in these slides after this for the destination prefectures from the 3 prefectures of Iwate, Miyagi, and Fukushima, and for destination municipalities in Miyagi Prefecture from every municipality. The slides represent the situation as of 3 days, June 29th, July 27th, and August 31st. The data of interprefectural evacuation were obtained especially for this presentation from the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications, and those of inter-municipality evacuation are available at the Miyagi Prefecture's official website. Prefectures and municipalities shown by yellow indicate that their coastal areas are damaged extensively by the tsunami. These 3 maps depict a few interesting salient features. First, we can point out the massive short distance evacuation within a particular prefecture or municipality. Such a pattern implies that refugees left eastern coastal areas for western non-evacuated inland areas. In particular, municipalities with sawtooth coastline lines tend to have more refugees since the damage in such areas are terrible. Second, Evacuation destinations are widely dispersed through eastern Japan, including the Tokyo metropolitan area. However, this tendency is understandable from the fact that the Tokyo area is a major destination from the prefectures of Tohoku regions, including Miyagi Prefecture. Third, it is very remarkable that a certain portion of refugees moved to the prefectures located in the western half of the country, beyond the Tokyo area. Such long-distance human migration is unusual in peace times. In these maps, the prefectures containing the two major metropolitan areas of Nagoya and Osaka, and even those prefectures further west of Osaka, have received refugees, although not many, partly due to the positive support offered by local governments in Western Japan. Now I'd like to briefly discuss the difficulties of refugees and the damaged areas. Unlike voluntary migrants, refugees moving as displaced migrants have faced several difficulties. Here, I'll touch on only the 6 particular problems. First, a certain portion of the refugees have experienced multiple painful movements from their original residence due to the changing situation of receiving organizations and municipalities, or their policies of closing small shelters and merging them into larger ones. However, such cases are relatively acceptable if the refugees under consideration are eventually able to return to their home addresses or municipalities. Second, evacuation was especially difficult for elderly refugees, since they tended to suffer the most due to the relocation damage. This has led to deteriorated health or often death. We hesitate to say this, but the elderly constitute a distinctive class of disaster victim. Third, movement from shelter to temporary houses is considered an important step in refugees' self-help. However, some refugees were reluctant to make this move because temporary house dwellers cannot receive free food service and have to pay for the costs of electricity, gas, and water. Furthermore, temporary houses were constructed at higher and less accessible locations distant from the coastline, implying inconvenience for shopping and going to the hospital. Fourth, refugees who are separated from other members of their community tend to feel loneliness, leading to alcoholism, deepened dementia, and even lonely death. Fifth, information on various administrative services from the home municipalities has tended to be scarce or delayed for refugees, which makes the return of displaced persons more difficult. Finally, a very important concern for refugees is whether they can finally return to their original residences, but a certain portion of them have very poor or no prospects of doing so. This applies especially to the refugees from Fukushima's coastal areas, which experienced the radioactive contamination. Now let me summarize the major problems concerning the devastated areas. Most of the fishing boats and fishing ports along the Pacific Ocean were badly damaged, and a considerable part of the flatlands along the coastline of Miyagi and Fukushima Prefecture were affected by the tsunami and nuclear power plant disaster. Therefore, it will be very difficult to regenerate agriculture and fisheries as basic industries. In addition, there is a great lack of meaningful employment opportunities in the damaged areas. As a result, some small fishing villages washed away by the tsunami will be reconstructed, but others may disappear forever. Even before the event of March 11th, the coastal areas with the three prefectures had largely experienced population decline. Most likely, the serious damage caused by the tsunami will further accelerate population decline. In fact, a very recent out-migration has been reported from these areas. Now, I would like to conclude my presentation. It goes without saying that the damage by the tsunami and the nuclear power plant crisis is simply terrible. However, we, as researchers of human mobility, should not be satisfied with preparing ad hoc reports. Since the resulting evacuation was a kind of forced or involuntary migration, it is now necessary to pursue a careful and comparative study between the situation observed over the past few months in Eastern Japan and that of other displacement migrations throughout the world. Thank you.
Yeah, Yoshi, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation concerning this terrible disaster in Japan. You gave us both the information about the strategies and of the authorities and the regulation system, but also about the reactions of the refugees. My question would be, is the government, are the authority willingly building up this area, or will it be a self-fulfilling process? As you said, maybe depopulation will be a consequence of the disaster.
Well, the occurrence of refugees is primarily due to the occurrence of earthquake and tsunami. Well, apart from reason, may be related to other reasons, but well, it's very complicated and difficult to explain totally. Anyway, well, current policy of the Japanese government is to reduce the number of refugees at the shelters and the temporary houses, and the limited time for opening temporary houses only 2 years, but I think it may be too short to solve many problems associated with this problem.
Okay, thank you. Other question from the audience to Yoshi?
You know this place.
Yes, I know this place. Thank you. I have two questions. You mentioned in the middle of your presentation a kind of domino effect. Many refugees are currently living in schools or preschools, and then the pupils were themselves displaced to other places. And did you pay special attention in your study to this domino effect in all the parts of the Japanese territory concerned by this catastrophe? And you said something at the end of your conclusion that you would like to make some comparisons with other situations. And according to you, what are the most comparable situations throughout the world?
Okay. Regarding the first question, the use of domino effect is not necessarily exact. Well, most of the local schools were used as shelters immediately after the tsunami. So the students or pupils could not go to school, local school, because the classrooms were almost all of the classrooms were occupied by the refugees. So in such situation, most of the pupils or students had to go to another school. So well, we cannot say such a situation by the term domino effect. I didn't use such term in my presentation, okay? And regarding the second question, well, as far as I know, the most important possible comparative study is the between East Japan Great Earthquake and the Kobe earthquake, which occurred in 1995. And as far as I know, a great difference between these two earthquakes are, well, regarding the East Japan earthquake, there were quite many personal information of refugees were updated at various websites, particularly located in the three prefectures. When we saw the victims of the Kobe earthquake, such a situation was not existent. Well, as you may know, the internet service began to be rapidly since the release of anyway, in the second half of the 1990s. So at that time, we could not obtain such a very detailed data at all. But this time, we could get such a very detailed data. It's a great difference between the two earthquakes. But how should we think such a situation this time? I cannot answer satisfactorily at this stage, but it's a kind of research task, even for me.
Further questions from yours? Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. I would like to know something about the possible change of nuclear policy from the government, and if public opinion is changed about this policy, this energetic policy, because from here, we see that Japanese people believe in nuclear energy. The main opinion in Italy is perfectly the contrary, the opposite.
Well, after the nuclear power plant crisis, well, entire opinion of Japanese people tends to move to against nuclear power. But well, our country lacks great source of resources. So, well, a certain portion of Japanese government's officials and the Japanese citizens thinks that, well, nuclear power plant may be necessary, even now or hereafter. It's the problem beyond my ability. So, all what I can say is this answer. Okay.
One more question, please.
I have seen slide 29. It explains to me the same problems happened in L'Aquila, 200 kilometers from here. 2 years ago, there has been a terrible earthquake, and living space, l'espace vécu of the people has a terrible division, has many problems that public opinion outside, government, decision makers don't quietly understand. Also in Japan, with the maximum, as Italian imagination, there is of order, as the in contrary the disorder of Italy, there is always the same problem of living in space. There will be, you think, for many years, you think that will be resolved in a short time, or there will be a problem who marks all the life of these people?
Well, situation observed currently in Japan is very similar to your explanation. Well, the very sad point about the refugees from eastern coast of Fukushima Prefecture is currently they cannot have the bright prospects for them to return to their home addresses. And well, or we cannot, or Japanese government officials cannot say how long they finally return to the original places. Or somebody says 20 years, somebody says 40 years, and so on. Right. I cannot answer your question exactly. Sorry about that.
It's the same reply.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for both the interpretation and the questions. Now we stay in Japan. Fukushima is still our topic. Hamadori diaspora, age and sex of evacuees from the Japanese nuclear crisis. Yutsuro Isoda from the Tohoku University in Japan will give us an introduction in this problem.
Now I will continue with the Japanese disaster. I'm here basically, I want to share this terrible experience with you. This kind of catastrophe does not occur very often in one location, but it is occurring in many parts of the world. If you look, if you think about Sumatra tsunami or the Chinese earthquake, the disasters with casualties exceeding more than 10,000 people are occurring pretty frequently if we look around the world. Now, my presentation will concentrate on Fukushima's nuclear crisis after the earthquake. I am from Tohoku University, which is the large main city in the mostly affected area. I was also affected. I spent 10 days in evacuation shelter. I could not take bath for 3 weeks. And so in the beginning I was saying I was affected. But later on I saw many people having more terrible experiences, and now I'm not so sure whether I'm the affected person. Okay. Introduction. The earthquake on March 11th shut down electricity supply to Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station, leading to hydrogen explosions. More precisely, the tsunami exceeding 14 meters shut down the electricity in a power station. It's so sarcastic. This Hamadori region, the coastal region of Fukushima Prefecture, faced triple disasters of earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear contamination. Evacuation from the 20-kilometer buffer from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station and Idatemura, northwest of the buffer zone, were ordered to evacuate, created about 63,000 evacuees as of July 14th. And also the 8 municipalities in Futaba County and Idatemura moved to other municipalities. So all the citizens and the municipalities are evacuating from this region. Roughly a half evacuated within Fukushima Prefecture and another half to all parts of Japan, mainly in East Japan. Majority of them are in Kanto area, and also Niigata area is especially important area for evacuees from Fukushima. I've done a previous analysis based on the list of evacuees previously mentioned by Yoshi. Has a lot of private data on sex, age, and the location of origin and the destination for evacuation. The analysis of age and sex revealed that young population, ages 0 to 14, are very often outside Fukushima, concerned with the safety from the radioactivity, which is associated with movement of female ages, age 30 to 44, which is a mother of this child generation. Especially female is underrepresented in Hamadori region and more in other areas. The people who are staying very near the Fukushima Hamadori area is the persons aged 75 or more, and is also associated with male aged 45 to 59, which is about child generation of this age group. And this is also female and male, but predominantly males. So we have age dimension and also gender dimension to this evacuation behavior. But we wanted to know more about the detail how evacuees are doing, especially on housing and employment, and also because we're doing about migration, so selective migration. So we'll base our argument on data from Okuma Town. Okuma Town is where Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station is. And the data are, one of the data we've done is the interviews to evacuees in evacuation shelters. We've done about 30 households in late June. And also, and this will aid our interpretation of the second data source, which is a questionnaire conducted by the Okuma Town, sent to household heads in various places. 4,500 were sent, and 3,490 were returned. And we're going to be using this data for analysis. Okuma Town, which has this Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station, is otherwise largely a rural area, but one of the few rural municipalities having positive population growth. You see, Japan has a declining population, so, but this has a positive population growth due to nuclear power plant construction and maintenance. We'll base our discussion based on human capital theory. Human capital theory, very classic, but still provide useful dimensions to analyze diverse evacuees and insights to how compensations has to be made. One is the attachments to the region. Some majority of people say they want to go back to the region, although the prospects are that they will not be able to go back for 10 years, 50 years, 100 years. We don't know yet. There's the attachment to the region rise because previous location-specific investment gives greater returns. Location-specific investment includes physical ones like housing, but also human capital aspects like lifetime employment or secure job in the region. Many employees are employed in nuclear-related business and skill, which is very specific to this region. And they're very ambivalent about nuclear policy towards the future because they were having a lot of income from that. Also farmland, which is strongly affected by the contamination. Also the other local investment includes business networks, like the territory that the shops have and the network between the suppliers, and also lastly, a personal network that is kind of a raison d'etre of being there. Okay, Other issues, the mobility and the destination choice. There will be issue of selective migration. Some parts of it will be like brain drain, or young people moving out and the old people remaining. And this is also the young and able citizens will likely to move out because they'll be better off being in other places. We can identify different types of evacuees, although in the beginning everybody has had to evacuate. But if we look closely, there will be people, some like transferred personnel of a nationwide corporation. They might be having personal belongings in the house, back in the region, but otherwise they do not have much assets in the region. Local employees of firms outside the affected region can maintain employment even though they might not be actually working. Local employees of the firms of the affected region will be terribly affected because the firm will be closed. And also the owners of these firms, including farmers, will have a lot of damage there, including the reduction in the value of the properties. Also, the retired who already invested most of their resources in the region, like housing, personal network, have much to lose from this disaster. So going to the analysis, firstly on employment and housing. Let's go on to accommodation type. There was 3,419 evacuees, and they're in these kind of evacuation housings. At the time of the questionnaire, late June, most evacuees in evacuation shelter, this one, 30%, were in hotels. Basically, there was a lot of spa resorts who were where tourists canceled their visit, so there was vacancy there. Also, there was a vacancy in off-season ski resorts. So there were most of them were in those hotels. But by now, most should have moved to temporary housing, the second one, which will be rented free for 2 years. But as Yoshi mentioned, the food and the utility has to be paid by the evacuees. But of course, later on, we expect, pretty obviously, that will be compensated by the Tokyo TEPCO, the Tokyo Electricity Corp, who owns the nuclear power plant. Many prefectures and municipalities offered vacant public rented housing, and that is often included in other category. And this other category also include employment-related housing. In terms of employment, this is a cross-tabulation of previous employment and current employment. And the 56% of previously full-time employed persons are still employed. But we have to think about these issues. Employees of firms outside the region who might be transferred already. Employees of firms outside the region who might not be actually working but may be maintaining employment status. Employees of firms of the region which have not closed yet and did not fire employees might be included in this figure as well. There's very few changes, 3%, from full-time to part-time employment, because part-time employment doesn't make much earning for a living. This study will use the ratio of not employed previous full-time workers, this figure, as this figure, as an indicator for unemployment. In this case, 40% of the previous full-time workers are unemployed. Now, if we look by employment, by previous employment status, we can find that unemployment is highest among the self-employed. But the employees are, the employment rate is less, probably because they are employed in firms outside the region. Pretty obviously, civil servants is maintaining full-time employment. There's a difference in unemployment rate or employment rate depending on accommodation type. Those in evacuation shelter and temporary housing rented by government has relatively high unemployment rate. Those renting in by their own budget have very low unemployment rate and high employment rate. So the reason of high unemployment in evacuation shelter is that the locations having these evacuation shelter face sudden increase in job seekers, but also evacuees in evacuation shelters are selectively those are less endowed because evacuation shelter provides food, they selectively stay and remain in evacuation shelters. Okay, let's go on to migration and selectivity, our main theme. Now, Okuma citizens are all around Japan, but mainly in East Japan area. This is based on the register data that Yoshi mentioned, the national network of refugees. But our sample of the questionnaire had a similar distribution with this one. In order to further analysis with the given sample, I've made a custom geographical division, six custom regions. One is Hokkaido and Tohoku, having 93 samples. Fukushima Prefecture itself, Niigata Prefecture, which has a large sample, especially because it has a Kashiwazaki nuclear power station in the prefecture, also owned by TEPCO. Previous nuclear power plant workers in Fukushima were transferred to Niigata because and some of them are still working in Fukushima area to do the recovery work, but they are registered in Niigata. The fourth is North Kanto, immediate vicinity of the Fukushima, and South Kanto, which roughly match with Tokyo metropolitan area, which has a rich employment opportunity, and the six other, all the rest of Japan, believed to be safer in terms of nuclear contamination. We'll be doing a similar analysis over and over again, this cross-tabulation. We have these regions, 6 regions, and the categories here. What I have done is get a ratio of persons in this region in each of the categories. So the row total is 100%. But the analysis will be based on looking at the variation in numbers across the column, along the column. And the colors shows the relative size within the column. So most of the evacuees in Fukushima Prefecture are in evacuation shelter or in rented by government. But in other places, for example, like Niigata Prefecture or North Kanto is like owned by their own, and these are important location for evacuation. But for South Kanto, they're relying on relatives and friends, mostly parents or children's houses. probably because of the high rent in South Kanto area. Okay. I have to quickly finish this off. How did they choose their location? It is because they're instructed by the government for Fukushima area, prefecture, but for other areas, relatives and friends were more important. By sex, we have more female respondent in distant areas, probably because women preferred safer areas for themselves and also for their children. Let me skip this part because I've done similar analysis previously. By previous employment status, employees are moving more towards Kanto area and other region, distant area, whereas civil servants are remaining in Fukushima prefecture. Let me skip this one again also. Let me look at the employment prospects in each region. Because Niigata prefecture has this TEPCO's nuclear power plant, many of them are still employment fully, or unemployment is lowest. But otherwise, there's not much difference between the areas. So even though South Kanto area is employment-rich area, it doesn't mean that people are having more jobs. But this picture looks different if we look by previous employment status, employee and self-employed. People move to Niigata prefecture and Kanto area have high employment rate and low unemployment for employees of private firms, but that does not, it is not same with the self-employed who closed their shops and moved to Kanto area. For example, looking here, South Kanto is the lowest full-time employment rates for self-employed. So it doesn't mean that if they move to employment-rich region, they can get the more employment. It's probably basically from the transfer personnel. Okay. Let me just mention some thoughts not directly linked to the empirical results. The difference in the effects of nuclear crisis is already emerging among evacuees who are well endowed with the resources outside the region and with the previous investment focus in location-specific assets and those people who lived in the region for long generation. There seems to be a difference in interest among the municipality and citizens. Municipality wants citizens eventually to come back, but citizen wants to have healthy, productive life. Item particularly hard to compensate is jobs and earnings. For mid-career workers, having a new secure job is very difficult in Japan. So job creation coupled with compensation is probably necessary. And also there is dilemma in compensation scheme design. Compensation should fully cover the pecuniary and non-pecuniary losses, but compensation should not deter citizens to start a new life. That's all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yusuru. Thank you very much for your very detailed analysis of the economic consequences for the evacuees, especially of the disaster in Japan. I assume there are many questions to you.
Thank you. I have 3 short questions. What about the duration of the consequences of this disaster? I don't know the situation. I live very far from Japan. And I guess that it is maybe not only a case of reconstruction because of the earthquake and the tsunami, but maybe would there be long-run consequences related to the radioactivity? This is my first question. Are all the consequences of this disaster and the housing of refugees, evacuees, is it all supported by municipalities, prefectures, or the central states? And does it have something to do with the quality of the housing of the refugees? And my third question, I'm sorry, you said something about the reconstruction and the the disaster and the economic effects, but on the contrary, cannot we assume that the reconstruction process is an economic opportunity?
For the first issue, how the duration is hard to tell, because the municipality in question is right on the place, so it has very high radiation level. So, well, at best maybe 10 years, worst maybe 50 years. We don't know it. We don't know because how well we can reduce the contamination level after this. And also the difficulty is we don't know yet the impact of low dose of radioactivity for long term. And there's ambiguity in that health effect, so that also adds to this difficulty. The second issue, the evacuation process is financed by municipality, but prefectural government and national government. These will be later on compensated by the Tokyo Electricity Corporation, TEPCO, primarily by them, but also by the national government. But if we think about how TEPCO earns money, if they cannot pay all the compensation money, they basically raise the electricity bill for the Tokyo citizens, or they'll borrow money from or the national government will pay the compensation. So in the event, it will be paid by the citizens. The third issue, the opportunity for reconstruction. Yes, in terms of nuclear related workers, there seems to be a work for cleaning up the messes. And also there's the Japanese policy towards nuclear power generation is reversing, and some municipalities are arguing closing down the oldest nuclear plants. So that part might be a kind of a opportunity and a way a job can be created for the persons evacuating.
Further questions? If this is not the case, the time has nearly gone. We also can say thank you for all the presentators today and for the discussion today. Also, we had a very vivid discussions and very interesting contributions. Thank you very much. Mostly the questions and the answers went to the direction that Armando mentioned in the first beginning of our session today when he spoke about global change. This has to do with global change, education, mobility, of course, and also the consequences of such disasters. Thank you very much, and we have now lunchtime.